Module 9, Parallel Translation Corpus, Part 1. In this module, we will be discussing, as well as in the next module, the theoretical and practical issues relating to generation, processing, and management of parallel translation corpus, a new genre in Indian languages, which is developed as a consortium mode project entitled Indian Language Corpora Initiative under the aegis of Government of India. There are several issues relating to the development which are discussed here, keeping in mind that the ready applications of parallel translation corpus in computational linguistics as well as in applied linguistics. In a normative manner, we first define what is a parallel corpus, then identify its properties and features, and in the next module, we will discuss about its composition, analysis of the corpus, and its application in various domains. What is a parallel corpus? We are talking about a parallel translation corpus. In our earlier module, we have discussed about parallel corpus and translation corpus. Now we are talking about parallel translation corpus, where both the things are combined together. The term parallel translation corpus, in principle, suggests that it contains texts and their translation in parallel form. It is entitled to include bilingual, also possible, if possible, particularly in case of Indian languages, is a multilingual text as well as texts that fit under translation. A parallel translation corpus, by virtue of its character and composition, is made of two parts: a text taken from a source language and its text taken from the target language. Although a parallel translation corpus is normally bilingual and bidirectional, it can be multilingual and multidirectional, particularly in cases of Indian languages, as it actually happened in ILCI and ILCI 2 projects for the Indian languages. In these two projects, the new strategy is adopted where Hindi is treated as the source language and 17 other Indian languages are treated as target languages, and texts are translated in all 17 languages. So, after the completion of the project, we get a good parallel translation corpus. The issue of multidirectionality is best understood if we keep in mind that Hindi is here used as a source language and other Indian languages are used as a target languages in this project. So what happens when a text is generated, a translation is generated in one of the Indian languages, and also the same time Hindi sentence is translated in other Indian languages, we get good parallel corpus across all Indian languages. So here the advantage is that we can migrate from Bangla to Odia, Odia to Telugu, Telugu to Tamil, Tamil to Malayalam, Malayalam to Konkani, Konkani to Gujarati, Gujarati to Marathi. So this is always possible that we can compare between Hindi and any of the Indian languages included in the project. On the other hand, it is also possible among those Indian language translated texts, we can also have the multidirectional applications. So theoretically, a parallel translation corpus is supposed to keep meaning and function of words and phrases constant across the languages. Although alternation in structure is a permissible deviation, is approved, a parallel translation corpus is often an ideal resource for comparing the realizations of meanings of structures in two or many different languages under identical situations. Also, it makes possible to discover the cross-linguistic variants or alternative readings of meanings of concepts in the target languages. Thus, a parallel corpus becomes very useful for cross-language analysis and formation of comparable lexical databases necessary for multilingual translation. Since a parallel corpus contains text from one language and its translation in many other languages, it may be viewed as a subtype of a parallel corpus, which in principle requires its elements to be maximally comparable to each other. Therefore, it is wiser to consider a parallel translation corpus as a special kind of corpus, which is identical in genre, similar in text type, uniform in format, parallel in composition, identical in text content, comparable to each other, and specific in utility. Construction of a parallel translation corpus is a complex task. As you know, that it has to keep many things into mind, that it has to have the properties of a translation corpus. At the same time, it should have the values or properties or elements of a parallel corpus. Both are combined together. So, I would like to emphasize here that when we are trying to develop a parallel translation corpus, at least 6 parameters need to be very clearly understood. That both source language text and target language text should be equal in genre, similar in text type, identical in content, similar in form, similar in subject matter, and equal in register. So, these 6 important parameters are often followed rigorously while trying to develop a parallel translation corpus. And since it is a parallel translation corpus, we have to be very much careful while trying to collect texts to be included into it. So, many of the conditions already been defined for parallel corpus as well as translation corpus are equally applicable here. So, the conditions which we need to follow at the time of either translation corpus or parallel corpus can also be applied here, and those conditions are mostly repetitive in nature. Say, written texts are included in the parallel translation corpus because the spoken text is not easily available for these purposes, and our present focus of linguistic research and development are mostly concentrating on written text documents, written text materials. So, the texts which are included into parallel translation corpus must reflect on the contemporary language use, although we can refer to the earlier texts or historical text that has certain diachronic value, and for translating historical text we may need to refer to the historical texts into the corpus. But usually the contemporary texts are taken into consideration. Text should be restricted to a specific subject. If it is politics, then translation corpus should also come from all the languages from the politics. It should include texts from specific domains of language use. Text from both source language and target language should be comparable as far as possible with their content, meaning, subject matter, and major domain. The text should be fairly large in amount. It's not only a few sentences, a large amount of texts, and that should be coherent text obtained from the beginning to the end point or the breaking point. Maybe whole chapter, maybe a section, maybe the whole paragraph can be considered as parallel translation corpus. Text should faithfully represent regular and special linguistic forms and elements of the source language and the target language. They should be large in size to encompass the maximum varieties in content. Lexical varieties should be high in a parallel translation corpus because ultimately this parallel translation corpus will be used to develop the lexical databases also. Text should faithfully preserve domain-specific words, terms, idioms, phrases, and other lexical elements, which are very much important in subsequent stages of scientific and bilingual lexical database generation and scientific text analysis. Text samples used in a parallel translation corpus should be maximally authentic and referential for future verification and validation. If possible, text should be always available in machine-readable form for ready access and reference by the end users. The end users should use language data in multiple ways and multiple tasks for statistical sampling, for text alignment, for lexical database generation, for text processing, translation, terminology database generation, and many other tasks. Both linguistic and extralinguistic information should be captured maximally in the parallel translation corpus in a systematic way, so that the users can have the access of information easily from those for future reference and applications corpus. We are presenting below, they have given a sample how Hindi and Bangla texts are developed in a systematic manner to be considered as parallel corpus, translation corpus. Now, there are some features of a parallel translation corpus. Most of the features we have discussed about a general translation corpus are also useful for parallel translation corpus. Here, the major features are, I am not going to give the full details, this is available in the materials. Here, I will just mention the quantity of data. If the one amount of data in this parallel corpus should be quite large in size, so that very systematic, faithful analysis and inference deduction is possible. So, the large amount of data can give certain amount of advantages, because it gives presents a better scope of variations of texts. It provides a better spectrum of the patterns of lexical and syntactic usages in source language as well as in the target language. It confirms increment in the number of textual citations that provide scopes for systematic classifications of linguistic items in terms of their usage and meaning. It assures better opportunity for obtaining all kinds of statistical results for more faithfully for making various correct observations. It gives wider spectrum for studying patterns of use of individual words and sentences. This helps to make generalizations about syntactic structures of the source language and the target language as well. It helps to understand the patterns of use of multi-word units like compounds, collocations, phrases, idioms, and proverbs in the source language as well as in the target languages. It helps to identify coinage of new words and terms, locate their fields of use, find variations of sense of these terms, and track patterns of their usage in texts. It gives far better scope for faithful analysis of language for scientific and technical terms, a real challenge in translation. The second feature is quality of the text. This relates to the question of authenticity. That means the texts which are included into the parallel translation corpus should be maximally authentic and a good representative of the target community of the languages which are taken for it. There are certain parameters to identify the authenticity. Say, repetition of text and sentences should be mostly avoided in parallel translation corpus. Ungrammatical constructions should be removed. Broken constructions should be ignored. Incomplete constructions should be separated. Mixed sentences should be avoided. Text from single field or domain should be considered. Both systematic, asynchronic, and diachronic text can be considered. Standard forms of regular usage should be considered. Text representation should be maximally balanced, non-skewed, and maximally wide. Text should be homogeneous in form without distortions of language data. So these are the parameters based on which the quality of text is determined. Text representation should be wide. It can come from all domains. So text can, particularly in cases of written text, the text that can come into parallel translation corpus can come from not only from one or two domains, but it can come from all possible domains. Normally, the text sample should not be collected only from one or two domains. They should be maximally representative with their all other domains. Therefore, a parallel translation corpus should contain samples not only from imaginative texts like fictions, novels, stories, but also from all imaginative texts, informative texts rather, like natural science, social science, earth science, medical science, engineering, technology, mass media, commerce, banking, advertisements, sports, posters, newspaper, government circulars, notices, and similar other sources. What I argue is here that we can have text from all other possible domains to be included in the parallel translation corpus. To be truly representative, samples should be collected in equal proportion from all the sources, irrespective to text types, genres, and time variations. A sample of a parallel translation corpus is not yet finalized. It is better that the more amount of data which are widely representative in nature can be included in the parallel translation corpus. At present, the IELCA project has 50,000 sentences from each domain, where the number of sentences can be divided equally among the subdomains. Next issue is simplicity. So, texts included in a parallel translation corpus should be in simple and plain form so that these texts are easily used by translators without being trapped in additional linguistic information or marked up within the texts, so that this can be easily accessible by them. Although there are certain advantages if a particular text is marked up with various annotations and additional linguistic information, for the time being, we need to have a parallel translation corpus in its raw, crude form without any additional information tagged to that. Equality. That each text sample should have equal number of sentences in a parallel translation corpus. For instance, if a source language text has 1000 sentences, then it is expected that the target language should also have nearly or similar number of sentences in the corpus. We propose this norm because we argue that sentences used in a parallel translation corpus should be equally numbered so that the translation mechanism can work elegantly. However, there might be some constraints also, like that. Number of texts available in the source language may not be more than that of a target language. It may happen that number of sentences available in the source language may exceed the number of sentences available in the target language, or the vice versa. Second important point is the collection of the sentences both from the source language and the target language may not be an easy task. It is not always easy to get the same number of sentences from both the languages. Parity in number of sentences is deceptive because sentences never occur in equal number in the source language and in the target language. The other important deficiency is that maybe a particular one sentence in the single source language is broken into two sentences in the target language, or the reverse one. That is, 2 or 3 sentences are merged together as a single sentence in the target language. So, having parity in the number of sentences in both the source language as well as in the target language corpus in the constructions of parallel translation corpus is not always possible. So, equal number of sentences cannot be collected from the source language and the target language in a uniform manner because, as you know, that size may vary across any languages. But still, even then, we are trying to maintain a kind of uniformity or consistency in cases of number of sentences. It is always advisable, always better to have equal number of sentences both from the source text as well as from the target text to be included in a parallel translation corpus. The next issue is the generation of translation corpus does not end with compilation of the texts. It also involves formatting the text in a suitable format so that data becomes easily available or retrievable by the end users. So compilation task is one task. Retrieving data and relevant information from the parallel translation corpus is another task. So this mostly relates to the technicians involved into it. While people are developing a corpus in digital form, in machine-readable form, so they should have a technique or a methodology or a system where it is possible for any end user to retrieve necessary data or information quite easily without much, even if one doesn't have much exposure to the technicalities or complexities involved in corpus generation processing. What we argue here is that a parallel translation corpus should always be easy to retrieve for all kinds of tasks. Verifiability. Text collected in a parallel translation corpus should be open for all kinds of empirical verification. It should be reliable and verifiable in the context of representing the language under study. Until and unless a parallel translation is fit for all kinds of empirical analysis and verification, its importance is maximally reduced. People may not find it useful until and unless they get an opportunity to verify the data with other languages or the other language corpora or any inference deducted from the analysis of the parallel corpus should be open for verification and validation by the end users. So what we emphasize here is that the text samples which are collected and compiled in a PC to represent a source language and target language should honestly register and reflect on the actual patterns of use of language. A parallel translation corpus should be made in such a way that it is easily qualifies to win the trust of the users who are verifying the texts and who agree that what is stored in the parallel translation corpus is actually a faithful reflection of the source language and the target language as well. For instance, if we develop a parallel translation corpus for Hindi and Bangla, we must be careful that the text stored in this translation corpus reflect properly on the properties respective language so that there is no hitch, no problem or no doubt in the end users that the information available in this corpus, parallel translation corpus, actually true and real reflections of the language in use. Next issue, documentation. A parallel translation corpus should grow with time with new texts to capture the changes in content and form. Also, it should register the varieties in texts. Although most of the present parallel translation corpora are synchronic, we should also take effort to make diachronic parallel translation corpus so that we find a better picture of the languages involved in the game. A synchronic parallel translation corpus, by addition of texts, may become diachronic over time. This can have the direct effects on size, quantity, coverage, and diversity of a parallel translation corpus. So, augmentation thus becomes an important feature of a parallel translation corpus. Finally, what happens that it is necessary to document in details the sources where from the text are collected. This is a practical requirement on the part of the parallel translation corpus designer to deal with the problems relating to verification and validation of the text included in the parallel translation corpus. It has many functions, not only the problems of copyrights, also many sociolinguistics, stylistics, historical analysis and cultural analysis of the text also require proper documentations of the text. The documentation information of a parallel translation corpus should be separated from the texts itself in the form of metadata. That is also valid for Ethernet polynomial corpus also, which we are going to discuss in subsequent modules. Point is that the metadata which is tagged with the parallel translation corpus should always be separable whenever required. So thus, the basic features and the requirement of a what is parallel translation corpus and its basic features are addressed here. In the next module, we are going to deal some other issues related to the parallel translation corpus. Thank you.